Hi and welcome to the Art of Wonderboy, the Dragon's Trap. Thanks for coming. My name is Ben Fiquet. I'm the art director of the game and co-founder of Lizardcube, a studio we started in 2015 with Omar, the developer behind this project. I was also the only artist on the game, so it's easy to talk about the artistic process behind it. As you may know, this is originally a game from 1989 created by Westone and directed by Ryuichi Nishizawa. Omar and I were Sega kids and we loved that game. So 25 years later, we decided to remaster that lost gem in HD, boasting hand-drawn art and animation, a rearranged soundtrack made with live musicians, and on top of that, you can swap from the original game at any time at the press of a button. For those who might not know what it's about, here's a video. So there has been many Wonderboy games starting from a young caveman on a skateboard to slowly shifting towards a fantasy action adventure platformer. This was a big license at the time, giving birth to numerous games on various platforms. But what mattered to us was Wonderboy 3, The Dragon's Trap, also known as Monster World 2 in Japan, Dragon's Curse for the PC Engine, and Turma da Mônica in Brazil. It's considered one of the best games of the platform and also a personal favorite for us. So when Omar said to me he wanted to try to do a remake of the game, I almost immediately started to draw. But how do you start? How do you transform nostalgia into something artistically relevant? Let's start by talking about inspiration. Quick note about me, I'm a French artist who's been working in video games and animation comics for about 12 years, and I've been trained in fine arts and studied animation at Goblin School. I'm not specifically a game artist, to be honest. I don't have the knowledge of many talented individuals here in GDC, but I really wanted to reimagine that great game at the best of my abilities. Even if I had to do a lot of interpretation, I really tried to nail the original inspirations that were projected into the game at the time. So for a start, Akira Toriyama, I think is a major inspiration in 80s Japan. Not only is definitely one of my favorite artists, but I think the developers were heavily influenced by his style at the time. And on top of Dragon Ball, his work on the fantasy genre is absolutely wonderful. European comics, which is a style people outside of Europe might not be used to, but this is a big part of every French kid's culture. It obviously is a huge influence in my work. The beauty of Hiroshi Yoshida, which I find particularly beautiful, and many other. I'm trying to show a wide range of things I like. All of them have in common to leave a big place for line art and subtle colors. And this was, I believe, an art style that has never been properly explored in video games. And at that point, even before starting, I knew I wanted to make a beautiful hand-drawn game. Handcrafted 2D in video games is beautiful, and in my opinion, it can give so much life to characters and environments. But the amazing things with 2D is that basically the only constraint is your imagination. You get what you see is what you get. And mainly the thing is we started with a grand total of 2 people, Omar, who's been doing the programming, and I. And we couldn't afford other team members, so we had to rely on our own strengths. And I'm not a 3D or cutout animation guy, but I can easily draw and animate in traditional animation. Artistic development. This is something I really like to do, looking to find the right art style for a particular project. In this day and age, where there is less and less constraints in terms of visuals, it should definitely not be overstated that you need a proper amount of artistic development. I'm not saying the visuals are everything in a game, but good art will help you not to have your game overlooked and ultimately bring more sales. And first, I'd like to praise the beauty of the original game. It might not look like much for many of you, but there are really beautiful choices that were made with all the constraints of the master system, palette limitation. The sky, for example, is rarely blue, and this indicates a deliberate taste and work of color theory. The style is simple, but everything is rich and vibrant. So when I started, I really didn't know what shape the project would take, so the obvious thing to do was to make mockups for visualizing what I had in mind. At first, I tried to be very loose, experimenting far from the actual image and design of the original game. I tried flat colors, uneven ground, background actions. But as the project took shape, I tried to get closer and closer of the original. Eventually adding effects, watercolor style, but limited to the original shapes. This was the first image we were really happy with, an image that will drive the art in the right direction. I also like to test out in video form and ended up making a test in After Effects just to see if parallax would work. Here's another mock-up I did following that art direction. You can see a very early version of the UI. It's also very important and took many iterations to get right, but we won't have time during this presentation. At that point, I started to implement characters into the background. One important thing I tried to do was having a sense of unity between characters and background. This is why the lines are equally thick in the background and in the characters. You want to feel that you created scenery, not just gameplay assets layered on top of each other. Here is an evolution of the introduction of the game, which I started by doing a color test. And then adding details. In this image, I wanted to show all the locations you might encounter in the game, but it could prove quite distracting. So here's the final image, and with the final image, I also tested out animation because I wanted to have that in the game, but it was a bit too much work to have proper animation for cutscenes, so we decided to scrap it out. Characters. It was time to really focus on characters, and the characters were kind of tough, really, because it has been very difficult to pinpoint exactly what they look like. As we've seen, the games are all very different in terms of design, and even in the same game, things might not be rock solid. These are the official artworks, for example. But these are the sprites you see in-game. That's not even the same colors for the hero of the air. What would be considered the right choice? And we met with original creator Nishizawa-san, and I asked him if they had any concept art on the characters on paper. He told me that at the time they didn't really do those kind of things, mainly because they didn't have the time. They drew every pixel art straight away into the game. And so the mindset I was in for this project was to sublime my childhood, to make it look as I saw when I was a kid. So I decided that the Master System sprite were the right starting point. Like with the mockups, I started really loose. At the time, we didn't know if we could acquire the official license, and I started to scribble different kind of characters. That's when Wonder Girl emerged. She eventually found a way into the game, as we thought it would be a nice addition to the game. The nurse and the shop owner. Sorry, what? Slowly, the first character we were really happy with started to appear. Some were easier to apprehend, and some took many iterations. And on a side note, I'd like to say that a good concept art doesn't necessarily require tons of drawing. You often see art directors priding themselves in having millions of drawings before deciding on a specific one. But I'd like to say this is not mandatory. If something good comes at you right away, be smart and seize it. If you're absolutely convinced it's good, I don't know, go for it. It can save frustration, time, and eventually money. I also had to respect the boundaries of the original sprite for collision. But as you can see, this is when I started to take some liberties. One of the good things with doing a remake is that you already have the full scope of assets you need. In this case, which kind and how many enemies I had to draw. You can say the same about all the location and even the length of the animations. I only have two advice for character design. The shapes, with the variety of the shapes gives a reason to your drawings. You might want to have a big head and small feet, or a large body and big hands. This is important for adding character, and having a good silhouette is also very important. And contrast, on top of the reason you give with the shapes, it can also be a huge boost if you vary colors and contrast inside the character. So animation, this is something I really like. Actually very important for me as part of video games. A good art direction in my mind should have in mind how the characters will move. It can convey more emotions or impact if you place some attention on it. And this is my personal references. I grew up in the 90s, and there was a wave of beautifully animated games initiated by Dave Perry using the technique they call Digicel. This was a game I loved, and it feels to me they were so alive. Like this one, I mean, it's beautiful. So the pros and cons of traditional animation, it obviously is beautiful. It's easy to start. I think that's what I think. You just have to draw a succession of drawings instead of a huge setup of rig, texturing, etc. But you won't have a lot of room for iteration, since you would have to redraw your frames every time you make a change. And you need a capable team of artists. And sometimes it can be tricky to have. You can change the character's appearance during the game because you would, again, have to redraw all the frames. And the texture management can be tricky. So these are the first tests I did for the animations. Is crucial to plan things in advance, especially with traditional animation. And before really starting to make the game, I started experimenting with different design and software. The first version was mainly to try animating in Flash, which doesn't quite work for me. I've been struggling with Flash my whole life. And the second one was here to refine the technique and also to pass on to Omar to try to implement in the prototype. I wasn't quite happy with the design, and the animation felt a bit dull. So finally, the third version, more bouncy, better design, the technique is almost there. Another set of animation tests, you can see, for example, that the lion's word was not easily readable at first glance. I decided then to convey its use for gameplay, which is one heavy weapon able to crush above and below him, so heavy in fact that he has to drag it behind him. And the thing is, I love we kept it, but sometimes, as far as collisions are involved, you can see the sword overlapping the background with no real sense at all. This animation is Wonder Boy at the beginning of the game. This is what I wanted to do. Because at the beginning of the game, you're supposed to be at the end of the second game, Wonder Boy 2, and you're all powerful, you have the legendary gear, and I wanted him to move a bit cocky and show off himself. Eventually, we scrapped that because, again, too much work. And at some point, I wanted to try to have town portals, but instead of a magic door, I thought it would be funnier to have that dragon mouth swallowing you and spitting you back in town. Now, everything this animation are doing is just improving the look and feel of your movement. We didn't change the physics behind it because you can still play the original game, but even then, just adding squash and stretch, anticipation, or pacing can give a whole different appreciation for controlling your character on screen. And in my opinion, even if the control stays a bit stiff, you now have a better sense of your character and the enemies. So here's a process video. As you can see, I started by taking references from the original animation frames. Thanks to the community for that, because I grabbed it from internet. And first, the rough animation. You can see the sword swing is a bit different than in game. I'll explain later why. And then after that, you have the cleanup part where you have to retrace everything you did. And finally, color. And on top of the colors, I like to add a dark gradient, which helps anchoring the character to the ground. Here's an example of constraint I had to deal with. You can see the sword swing of the original, which was quite linear. I wanted to add more of an impact, and it's implied to have a longer pause at the beginning and a swift slash of the sword, but we decided to follow the collision of the original game. You can see the collision here in green. And it was animated at 30 FPS. That's why you can see the sword is a little bit late at the beginning compared to the collision, but catches up afterward. It's not really perceptible, but it eventually drives the work in certain ways. Here's the way I cheated with 2D animation. I added a turn animation, particularly for smoothing the transition when switching direction. But how to have a right-handed character suddenly become left-handed? The original game did an amazing thing by having another sprite when you turned, so your character will always have his sword in his right hand. But they add a total of 7 frames of animation per character, and I have 10 times more. So even if I really wanted to have that feature, it was simply an absurd amount of work. So here's a trick. I drew the animation as to the shield and the sword flow a smooth curve and end up in the same place when facing the opposite direction. And with the magic of animation, you don't see nothing in real time. Boop. Backgrounds, another challenge, because due to the technical limitation of the Master System, the original game could feel quite empty in some areas, so I had a lot of interpretation to do. Here's the mummy room, for example. There's basically nothing, because technically the Master System was considering the boss as the background, so they couldn't have anything else. And here's what I've done with the place. Overlooking the changing graphics, in this kind of areas, I added visual storytelling by placing various elements in the background. Here's another example. The forest outside the village was just trees next to each other, repeating for 2 levels. And I experimented very different things before having something interesting. And the main thing that was missing was the gameplay readability, because in this level, you have a little cloud throwing you fireballs, and it was not really obvious. So I stripped down the most I could and gave space for the cloud, but doing so, that same background was becoming quite empty. So I added that statue. It doesn't particularly make sense. Some players have been asking what it represents, and even if I know it's mainly for filling a void, it is also a world-building item. It might be the statue of a lost hero, a place where heroes die, who knows. It gives you something to look at and wonder instead of, void. And here's the game. You can see I added a lot of parallax to give perspective. It's always eye candy. And on the statue, please note that we added a slight 3D deformation. It's not really obvious, and we used it for pillars and big sprites, but it feels more natural that way. Eventually, I tried to spark interest in every screen, adding details and a bit of narrative. And here you're going to see 3 different levels of the desert area. In each of them, I try to have something changing. You start at the base of the pyramids and then pass in front of the old temple, and finally end up in sort of an oasis, all with mainly the same assets, but rearranged to feel you change scenery. And here you go. When you have every asset separated, you start to implement it. Omar managed to create a splendid engine where I could put everything I needed, all of it running in real time on top of the original game, allowing me to know exactly where to put my new assets and eventually making something pretty. And if you feel like a tinkerer, you can access that tool in the Steam version of the game. Just have to edit. You can find the explanation on the website. And here we are. I feel incredibly grateful being here, presenting what started as kind of a fun project. Not only we got to work on a dear childhood memory, but we managed to do it the way we wanted it, and it resonated with players. I'd like to thank, obviously, Ryuichi Nishizawa and his team for making that wonderful game. Not only is a really nice guy, but he has been only but supportive of our work from the beginning. And of course, all the project behind it, Omar, whose love and passion were the true engine of the project, and the team at Lizardcube, and our publisher Dotemu, who first believed in us. And on a side note, I'd like to show you a bonus that I've been playing with. Some of you might remember that game, which is called Kid Chameleon. And this is what I've done with it. It could be awesome, but this is not a real project because really I don't have the time for it at the moment. So, but anyway, it could be cool. Thank you very much. We might have time for a few questions.
I'm a huge fan of the game. I played through it all. It's fantastic. I fell in love with it when I saw the original, or the initial promotional art. I'm curious what's next for Lizardcube and what's next for Wonder Boy. Are you guys going to do a new version of anything, or?
Actually, I can't talk about it. It's not Kid Chameleon, obviously, but it's a big project, and I'm very happy to be part of it. But it's going to be traditional animation. No worries.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Amazing art
Thank
all
you.
the way. So my question is for the large object that you were describing on the background
Yeah.
that had a 3D effect.
Yeah.
Was that a normal map thingy or is that like 3D model?
No, it's actually just a simple cylinder that Omar added the option when I wanted a sprite to behave like a 3D object. It's just behaving like a cylinder based on the camera. So there's no normal map, no modeling. If you look closely, it's not very well made. But it does a trick, and if you look at the pillars, it works better because it's very cylinder.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. Here we go, another question. Thank you very much.